The next thing I want to get onto is the metabolic adaptations, because these, again, I think this is probably one of the things that realistically accounts for 90% of the differences men and women see in fat loss. If we were to boil it down and be like, what's the one thing? I would say it's the metabolic adaptations. And what we've talked
Yeah.
about these before, and it's basically the fact that due to the fact that women are the vehicle for the continuation of society, women have a way more adaptive metabolism, right? And I've said it before, but like basically, like if one guy survived and all like overnight, Thanos snap, it's like literally we're killing half the population and it's all males, and there was just one guy who somehow, escaped it, right? Assuming the women that are left are willing to procreate with this one guy, the species can continue, right? The opposite is not true, right? If again Thanos snap, boom, half the population is gone, and it's all the women are gone except for one woman, it's very unlikely that the population is going to continue, right? So women are more valuable, right? And our bodies have evolved with that in mind. So how do we evolve with that? Well, the women that are more adaptable have more adaptable metabolisms that are able to, survive periods of starvation, are able to survive, epidemics, fucking ice ages, whatever else, right? They're able to survive having a low energy availability by shutting down, like we talked about earlier on, by shutting down these quote unquote non-vital functions, such as their hormonal system, such as this reproductive system. Like it actually makes them more survivable because they don't have that energy expenditure, right? So from a survivability perspective, like the metabolic adaptations that occur that serve to reduce, caloric expenditure for a woman, that's really beneficial for the survival of the species. Really, really fucking shit for fat loss, like really bad. Because you think about it, a guy goes into this 500-calorie deficit and is like, right, cool, I'm going to lose, a pound per week or whatever he thinks he's going to lose based on that, calculation or whatever. He's like, that's what I'm going to do, 500-calorie deficit. If a woman goes into a 500-calorie deficit, like the first week, maybe she loses a pound, but then all of a sudden her metabolism adapts like super quick. And it's like, oh, you thought you were in a 500-calorie deficit. Now that I've, reduced your metabolic rate, you're down to a 300-calorie deficit. Then the next week you're down to a 200-calorie deficit, and the next week a 100-calorie deficit. And it does this by virtue of reducing meat. Usually that's the big one where, you just stop moving as much. You generally get a lot colder. So like thyroid hormone output and everything goes down. And ultimately, again, it affects your adherence, and it puts you in a position where fat loss is just far more difficult, right? So that's the big one. And we've talked about it multiple times on the podcast before, so I don't think we need to do a huge deep dive on this, but everyone's metabolism adapts to the calorie load that you are putting into it. So if you're eating less, your metabolism goes down slightly. And again, this is adaptive. It's not damage or anything like that, because as soon as you put more calories in, it's going to go back up. It's going to go back to this quote unquote normal level. But it is something that's going to inhibit fat loss, because again, it comes back to calories in, calories out. And if you're eating in a deficit and that deficit is getting smaller and smaller because your body is adapting and not burning as many calories anymore, you're not going to get the fat loss results that you want. What are your thoughts there, Gary? Metabolic adaptations, would you agree that that is the number one? That is the master, understand that, and you've got everything to do, well, the majority of stuff to do with female fat loss.
Yeah, and I suppose like that's definitely something that is huge. And what I would put alongside it is it's a very much related point that you kind of alluded to. But that is the fact that not only do you have to deal with adaptations that are a little bit more sensitive, but also on average a lower baseline level of calorie maintenance to begin with, which is not necessarily concordant with the modern food environment. I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges for women and for just like smaller, lighter guys too. But it's just the fact that like if you're going out for food, drinks, etc., you're buying particular portions of food, it's just generally not in line with being able to lose body fat. If you want to go to Five Guys or something, get a lovely double cheese with bacon or whatever, and you're getting some fries and you're getting a milkshake, you're talking 2,000 calories. It's not uncommon for 50, 60, 70 kilo female to be within the range of 1,500 to 2,000 calorie maintenance. So it's very difficult to fit in those things on a regular basis. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just takes a lot more work than for me. Like me at the moment, for example, like I'm eating at least 4,000 calories a day, which means that if I want to go out for food, or I want to have a beer, or I want to have, I don't know, a Coke or some sweets, I don't have to think twice about that stuff just from a calorie perspective. I can just do it. It's just not a big deal. Whereas for someone with maintenance of 1,500, there's just so much extra thought and planning that has to go into these things that then limits your social life and your capacity to be able to engage in a fat loss plan long term while maintaining that social life and your career, etc. So yeah, the food environment and the social life of many people, even the professional life where people have to eat out on lunch meetings and stuff like that with business, they're very difficult things to put together. So that's definitely a huge barrier alongside the adaptations that then take place as you do it here.
Yeah, 100%. And like, again, like we did an entire podcast series on this, like fat loss generally around the food environment and stuff like that. But